Welcome to the number one podcast covering Michigan State basketball. The Final Four is not on the schedule. Join Rod and me, Eric, as we dive deep into the Spartans to get you prepared for every game. Subscribe today for in-depth recruiting updates and fantastic interviews with today's important college basketball personalities like Robbie Hummel.
Thanks for having me. I have listened to your guys' podcast numerous times on drives throughout any Midwestern Big Ten city. So I am big fans of your guys' work.
Jay Billis.
And next time, hey, if anybody in Michigan wants a December tea time, call me. You wimps won't show up, but I'll be there. I'll be there and play in the cold. And Izzo will be in front of the fire with hot chocolate.
Coaches Thomas Kelly.
No problem. Glad to be back, man. Glad to be back.
Mike Garland.
You just can't sit there and trade twos for threes. You can't do it. You're going to lose. Coming down the stretch, you're going to lose.
And more. You won't find better coverage of Spartan hoops than you will get here. For both the casual and hardcore fan, come along as we take you for a green and white ride. Hey everybody, it's Eric alongside Rod, here to talk about MSU's 63-54 victory over the Maryland Terrapins at the Breslin tonight. Well, my son ended up making the finals at his robotics tournament, which meant even with the late start, even later than it was scheduled at 5:30, I still was late to the game. And so I missed the first 5 minutes or so of the game, so we had to listen to Will Tiemann describe the action on the court.
How was that?
Well, there's a lot of people dribbling around descriptors, but I got the impression that
he got a few he got it's because they got off to a strong start.
Right, because
you missed a good opening.
Yeah, right. I missed the three, right, from Walker. I think Hall had a bucket or something.
Well, they were up 14-5.
Oh, I was there well before then. I think I missed the first.
Okay.
I think when I walked in, it was maybe 8-5 or something like that, or 6-5.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so
Gotcha.
I made most of the game. So anyway, we made it to a packed arena. It was very impressive. It was totally packed. And waited most of the game for something to happen. In fact, the young woman next to me fell asleep in the second half. And I
wow.
I couldn't blame her. Actually, her friend, she was I think a college kid, and so I was doing some like photo bombing. Her friends were taking pictures of her. It was kind of fun. And I accidentally woke her up, and she felt she felt bad. I said, "Don't worry, you haven't missed anything." So I don't know. I don't know how to describe the game except as like a rock fight interrupted by a sleep study. Until Michigan State went on that inexplicable 11-0 run with about 6 minutes left in the game, and the game was over. It's kind of weird. Where Malik Hall missed a pair of free throws, then they got a tap out. I think it was Carson Cooper. It led to a 1-1 chance by Hall, who buried both of them. I think Maryland came down and hit a couple of free throws, and then Hall hits a 3. He gets a 2 and 1, and that was sort of the game. And then the game sort of highlighted by Maryland being carried completely by Jameer Young with over 30 points. A little by Dante Scott, especially early, and really foul trouble keeping Julian Reese off the floor almost the entire game. I mean, he was completely ineffective.
Yeah.
So it was a weird game, but a win. And I guess, ultimately that's all that really matters. It puts Michigan State above 500 for the first time all year in the Big Ten, which is kind of hard to believe. We're 11 games in. Now they're tied for fourth at 6-5. So I don't know. What are your impressions of the game?
Well, I think you described it accurately, and we talked about it in the preview. We said, look, Maryland's only chance to win games really is to win ugly.
Yeah.
And their defense is good enough that they're able to do it often enough that they're a threat. They came in at 5-5 in the league, just like MSU. And they got the kind of game they wanted, which is very much to their credit, considering, as you say, how little Julian Reese was able to play. I didn't actually, I've had the box score up for a while, but I didn't look at
He actually played 14 minutes. It didn't feel like that, though.
14. Yeah, that's still, that's half of what he normally plays, maybe even a little bit less than that.
He played 32 the first matchup, yeah.
Okay, so there you go. So less than 50%. That's pretty crazy. And I'll say this. I thought one of the biggest plays of the game came extremely early, probably in the segment you missed.
I heard Mahdi drew a foul, right?
No. It was before that.
Oh, okay.
It was the first foul. Very quickly, MSU got, I don't know if it was off a steal or a long rebound. I can't remember, but AJ got into transition, and Reese was the defender going with him. And AJ played it perfectly, waited for him. Now, on the broadcast, they're talking about, well, he was conscious of Reese as a shot blocker. Yeah, that's true, too. He didn't want to get his shot blocked. But what he did was he very skillfully used his body to go into Reese, force contact, and draw the foul call. I think that was one of the most important plays of the game. And the reason why is it got him a foul almost immediately.
Right.
It came very early. And then, as we talked about in the pregame, this is a player who has had a propensity for being in foul trouble.
Yep.
And because of the way he plays, he's a very active defender, but that means he's also tends to take risks, put himself in positions where he can get a foul called and against him. And that's exactly what happened. Now, none of his fouls were even questionable, by the way. They were all, to my eyes, very obvious. No close calls. He didn't get homered. He got his money's worth. He just, the offensive foul that he got called with 8 seconds into the second half for his fourth foul, that was a big deal.
Yeah.
That was a big one too. But I go back to the AJ foul because that was the one that, no question about it, AJ manufactured.
Yeah, baited him into it.
And and it immediately set the tone. If Reese is able to go, say, get to that first, under 16 timeout, and he hasn't committed a foul yet, it might be a different scenario, but that didn't happen. He got one very quickly, and that sort of set the tone with him. And I don't think, all you got to do is look at the stats, the numbers, including minutes played. He never got on track.
No.
Now, having said that, as important as that was for Michigan State, it was hugely important. You got to give Maryland a lot of credit for making this a really competitive game, a more competitive game than I think the final score suggests.
Oh, yeah.
And that's down to Jameer Young, to a little bit of an extent Dante Scott, but mostly Jameer Young and the way they defended.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, those two things, we said it at the first game, we said it in the preview of this game. You should be saying it. Everybody listening to this should be saying it after this one. That is a very good defensive team.
Yeah.
They really are. They take away almost everything you want to do. And Michigan State went through long stretches of that game where it found it very hard to create offense, to run their offense, to generate good open looks. And that Maryland played the way they need to play, even without Reese in there. They need to do that defensively. They need to control the pace, make it a slow game, and just ugly it up and figure they can win a rock fight. And that was their game plan, I'm sure. And they did a pretty good job of it until, as you say, Malik Hall just took the game over.
Yeah.
And that was great. I mean, it was great to see it. He only had 5 points in the first half, I believe. He ended the game with 17 or 19?
19 points. He had 14 in the second half.
Yeah, and a lot of those came late at the free throw line where he got off to a bad start. I think he missed his first 3, and then he drilled 8 in a row. That was big. But I just think he was the difference in this game. Tyson Walker in the first half kept Michigan State's offense afloat. And in the second half, especially the last, whatever it was, 6-7 minutes, it was Malik Hall.
Yeah.
And he was the difference in this game because when push came to shove and some big moments arrived, Maryland did not have an answer for him. And this is a game where he showed you the complete Malik Hall experience. He had his bucket in the first half, which was just an unreal play that he made with his handle to create space for himself off the dribble, through traffic, going behind his back, and then rose up and hit, I don't know, it was probably a 10-footer.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Did that, had some post buckets, had some blow-bys, hit a big 3 during that run where he essentially won the game.
Yeah.
Was Michigan State's high rebounder, which I'm sure you're happy about.
I didn't pick him. Remember, I picked Akins.
Oh, that's right.
Who almost was there.
Thinking you would celebrate. Well, that's a shame.
He sound heartbroken.
but anyway, led Michigan State in rebounding. I thought look, Dante Scott played a good game, but not much of what he did really came against Malik. There were, some of those threes that came on switches where Michigan State, the guy who switched on him didn't extend the way he's supposed to, gave Scott a little bit more room than you should. I thought Malik played a really good game defensively, and he's been doing that without a lot of fanfare lately. And that's because he's not a guy who's going to block shots. He's not a big steals guy. He just plays old-fashioned Michigan State solid positional defense, and he's switchable. He can guard a lot of different types of players. So hats off to him. He's the guy who won this thing with a big assist from Tyson Walker. And then, also, look, Maryland's not a very good offensive team. That's putting it mildly, and we covered that in the pregame.
Right.
But you still have to go out there and check, even against a team like that, if you want to win a game. And I thought Michigan State's defense, for the most part, you could point to individual plays here or there where they didn't handle a switch well. That was most of it, actually, was not handling. Most of the threes that Maryland got were Michigan State not handling a switch well. But other than that, I thought Michigan State guarded pretty damn well, too. Maryland's kind of the standard setter in the Big Ten this year at that end, at least thus far. But I thought Michigan State was right there with them defensively. And then the numbers say the same thing, because I took a quick peek at KenPom before we started, and I believe they were up to number 17 in the nation in defensive efficiency after this game. So that's a pretty good number. It tells you something about the quality of defense Michigan State's playing. And I think after they had hit that period when Big Ten play restarted, where, for maybe a couple weeks in January, it felt like the defense had regressed. I think they're getting back up to where they need to be. I really do.
Yeah, I think, one of the things you can really look at is Dante Scott and his numbers. He was 5 for 19 in the game, 3 for 12 from 3. And that's largely Malik Hall. Not entirely, but a large part is Malik Hall. And and Malik also had 5 field goals, but only on 9 attempts, and 1 or 2 for 3. Right. And then he had 7 of 9 from the line. So, I mean, he was spectacular. And, I think I know people continue saying it because that's their first impression, like the girl you meet for the first time. But really, at this point, you got to say he's been a consistently very good player down this. I mean, almost the entire Big Ten season, certainly since we come back.
He's having a really good last year at Michigan State. We've seen many guys do this. We saw Joey Hauser do it last year. If you go back, and I'm talking about obviously not guys that were good their whole careers, but guys who had consistency issues. Travis Trice, really good example of it, where he just kind of turned it up. You could make an argument for both Kenny Goins and Matt McQuaid as seniors. Yeah. But by the time they were especially in the Big Ten portion of that last season, those guys elevated from, good role players to something more than that. And I think that is what we're seeing with Malik Hall. Doesn't mean that he might not have a rough game here or there the rest of the way, but I think you can look at the way he's playing his overall game and see that he's solved most of the problems that people would scream about in years past.
Yeah. And I mean, low volume, but don't look now, but he's up to 33% from 3 now with his 1 for 2. And I think he's well over 40% in the Big Ten, right? In Big Ten season. I was going to say,
yes, his Big Ten numbers are outstanding. Now, Jim Comparoni made a comment about this earlier in the week, which I think there's some validity to, which is, Malik's percentage is going up. That's great. What you'd like to see is maybe the volume a little higher, and of course keep that percentage intact with it.
Right.
So today he was 1 for 2. That's actually progress, because he hasn't averaged 2 attempts. That's more than his seasonal average of attempts from 3 on the year. So if he was 1 for 2 in every game the rest of the way, you would take it.
Sure.
You'd absolutely take it. And so I think there's something to that. Now, it's pretty clear to me that Malik is in a frame of mind that he is only going to take threes that are really open.
Yeah.
He's just not going to take many contested threes. It's just not going to happen. So that can make it hard to get more attempts up, because then you're really waiting on just great shot opportunities as opposed to good ones. And we'll see how that goes, or we'll see if maybe his confidence has gotten to a point that he's maybe willing to take shots with a little smaller shot window. But it's progress. There's no two ways about it.
And then, I think AJ largely played a really good game. I know he had 8 assists, 3 turnovers. A couple of those turnovers were, fog out. I don't know what you call them, but they're bad. They're bad turnovers. But I would say too, there was just your point about Maryland being a struggle defensively to try and get anything going. You just try and I think press a little bit harder, trying to make that 95% pass or whatever to get something going. And I think not only did he feel that, but you saw that with Trey too, a guy who this season is not really turned the ball over. He had assists and 3 turnovers. I mean, I think it's got to be the most turnovers he's had this season. So they just caused a lot of trouble.
His turnovers were all really bad, as were AJ's. They weren't like, okay, he traveled or he got stripped in traffic. They were, I'm throwing a pass 10 rows deep into the stands. Both of those guys. And yes, I think you're exactly right. We've seen enough of them. We know they don't do that typically, particularly Trey. So what's the explanation? I think the explanation is exactly what you just said. I think that when you're playing a team that guards as well as Maryland does, you start pressing. And you start trying. You look at some of the, Trey had one. They both had one, both Trey and AJ, where they tried to go cross court. And that's not to say that a cross-court pass is always a bad idea, because there are times where it's a skip pass. You're skipping the ball rotation to try. There are times when it's there, but neither one of them were anywhere close. And the fact that they were trying to make those plays suggests to me, I would agree with you completely. I think they were pressing, and you're going to press when you feel like you've been limited and everything's coming very, very hard. And so you end up trying to make the spectacular play. And that's what can happen.
Yeah.
So, I agree with you. I think that's exactly the reason why, Michigan State, they have 12 turnovers today. That's a high number for this team.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
But you have to, 2 things to keep in mind. One, Maryland does force a lot of turnovers. They're actually better than Michigan State in overall turnovers.
Right.
Their 2 teams are pretty much even in steals, but you know what? Most of Michigan State's turnovers were dead ball turnovers. So Maryland was not able to get easy offense as a result of it. That's important. Whereas the other end, if you look at points off turnovers in this game, Michigan State had 15 off Maryland's 13 turnovers. Maryland had 11 off Michigan State's 12.
Yeah.
It's not a decisive knockout punch win, but it is an edge.
Sure.
Not as big as the one they had in College Park, but it does matter. And I think a lot of that was down to the types of turnovers. Michigan State's a little more came in the flow of play, live ball turnovers. Maryland's, a lot of them were those plays we were just talking about where Michigan State throws the ball 10 rows deep.
And I thought, Akins, although he compared his performance in the last game where he was 7 of 10 from 3, just, kind of shooting out of his mind. 1 for 7 from 3, really struggled there. And then was 2 for 4 from the field for 2s. Still played a lot, 5 rebounds, 3 of them offensive. So I thought he was very good defensively. I thought he was, despite his offense not working, I thought he was still pretty good.
I'm gonna disagree. I'm gonna disagree on the defense. I thought Jaden played hard. The rebounding numbers were welcome. That was good to see. Particularly in the offensive end, where I think he can be a factor, no question. But his defense was not consistently off. It couldn't have been. The way Michigan State defended, nobody could have been that bad. But I think there were a couple of those possessions I talked about where Michigan State didn't handle screen and roll with Young very well.
Yeah, Young.
There was one in the second half. It was a big play because I'm trying to remember who hit the three. It might have been
I think it was Scott.
after a Tyson. Well, no, after a Tyson three.
Oh,
I
it
want to
was
say
Young.
put Michigan
It was
State
Young.
up 6.
Yeah, Young came down.
No, I'm saying for Michigan State who hit it. I think it was Tyson.
Yeah, you're right.
Hits a 3
Mhm.
to put Michigan State up 6.
Yep.
Or maybe it was Malik's. I can't remember which. But no, it had to be Tyson.
It was
had to be
Tyson. It was early
Couldn't
in
have come in
the
that Malik
half, yeah.
So Tyson hits a 3 to put him up 6. And watching that game, there were a few times. It's funny. Maryland only led the game, I think, for less than a minute. So not much. And it wasn't tied. I don't think it was ever tied after 0-0. If it was briefly. But Michigan State never got a working margin established. It was a really weird game in that way, that lead was just, 3 to 5 points for most of the way. That was a moment where it felt like Michigan State, and there were a couple of other times too, before they finally actually did it, where it felt like, you know what, if they get one more stop and a bucket and get this thing to 8 or 9, that could be enough to push Maryland over. It just felt that way to me momentum-wise watching it. And that sequence was another example. Jaden, I don't know what he thought he was doing. He was at least 10, 15 feet away from Young when Young got a wide open pass on the sideline for an easy 3 that he hit. And it just sapped all that momentum. And you're like, okay, now we're back in a one-possession game again.
Yeah.
Where if you just play steady defense, you got a pretty good chance at getting a miss because Maryland was not shooting well. Even Young was not great. Even with the streak he went on late in the game, he wasn't dominant that way. He had to take a lot of shots to score those points. But so that was disappointing to me. And then there were a couple of other times where I didn't think Jaden did well enough getting over the top. And was late recovering to a shooter. So I don't think it was his best defensive game. Obviously, he was not dialed in from 3, but I do think he played hard. The offensive rebounding was a sign of that. And the buckets he did hit were big ones.
Yeah.
They were important. That 3 he hit in the second half, Michigan State had gotten off to a terrible start shooting the ball from deep in the second half, and they needed that. In fact, I believe it was, well, I don't remember, maybe 1 of 3 that they hit in the second half, but that was important. He had another important bucket in the first half where he got I don't remember whether it was an offensive rebound, but he was very patient in traffic and managed to put it up and score inside, which was not an easy thing for Michigan State to do today. They had a lot of layups not go, and I think part of it was Maryland's physicality, and part of it was concern about Maryland's shot blocking. But Michigan State was not great around the rim, but Jaden did make one of those, a nice, calm, collected play. So not his best effort, but, they still won.
Yeah, for sure. And then finally, Madi Sissoko and Carson Cooper splitting the time almost completely evenly in this game. And they both sort of did different things. Carson was much better rebounding. It's sort of, especially in the offensive end. And that big one off that missed free throw, I'm pretty sure that was him tapping it out. Madi, great defensively, especially early. He got I guess, the second foul against Reese. And then, played pretty well. You definitely see his limitations, and it'd be certainly nice. Jackson got out there a little bit just for a few minutes. But it just became a bad matchup when you had Geronimo playing the center. It was actually really kind of tough. Maryland, by taking Reese out of the game, they played kind of smaller, and it almost made it harder for someone like Jackson or, basically Jackson to play out there because he almost needs a regular center at this point to play against.
I made exactly the same point on the Spartan Mag board. Somebody was asking, why didn't Jackson Calder play at all in the second half? And my response was, I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that in the second half, as opposed to the first, when Reese was sitting, Maryland decided to go small ball.
Yeah.
So they had Geronimo and Scott, and neither of those guys is a great matchup for Jackson Kohler right now. And Michigan State, unfortunately, Cohen Carr is not I think, proving to be trustworthy enough just yet defensively where you'd feel good about going with him and going small ball to try and counter it with he and Malik, let's say. So the choice Michigan State had was really, and this was not a game for Xavier Booker, believe me. He would have been stuffed in a locker by those guys. Those are grown men that were playing for Maryland inside, even with Reese sitting. And so I think they had to do that. But you know what? I think overall Michigan State made the best of that. If you look at those guys for Maryland, Dante Scott, 13 points, 10 boards, but as you said, 5 for 19 from the floor. Geronimo had 6 points, 6 boards. That's decent. That's decent play. So those guys got some things done, but they didn't dominate the game. And I think that's the important part. I thought that was Carson Cooper's best game in a while.
Yes.
I don't know how long.
For sure.
If you look at the total things he did, so 6 rebounds, 4 of them offensive. He had 3 blocks.
Yeah.
So he made an impact there. And he only scored 2 points, but the bucket he scored was a really nice catch of a pass from AJ. And then he collected himself. Reese was actually in the game when it happened.
Yeah. And
went up strong and finished. So that was a good sign. It was a nice, for a guy who gets dinged for his hands, it was a nice play with his hands to catch that ball, bring it down, get control, gather himself, go up and finish. That was really nice to see. And again, the rebounding and the defense that he played, he made an impact there as well. So I'm happy for him because I think he needed a good game. Turning just quickly to Jackson Kohler, he only played 4 minutes that came in the first half, but nice to see him hit probably about a 12 to 15 foot face-up jumper.
Yes.
It used every bit of the rim.
I was going to say, he used the entire rim.
It's what good shooters do, right?
Yeah. It looked good. I mean, it looked pure when I saw it, and I was surprised it hit the rim.
And even the one he didn't score on was actually a good move. He just missed the shot. But, flashes again from him. And we'll see, this next game coming up at Minnesota might offer some more opportunities for him because Minnesota more consistently goes too big.
Yeah.
They did it a lot in their game today. They went over Northwestern. So right now, that's where I think Michigan State feels comfortable playing him, is where he's not going to have to guard somebody significantly smaller, significantly more athletic. So that's going to mean there are some matchups that allow for him to maybe play 10 minutes. And then there are other ones like today where maybe it looks more like 4, but encouraging stuff from him with that jumper, because, if he can do that, now you're talking about a guy who can give you scoring at different levels. It's not even just low post stuff.
Yeah, and I feel a little bit more confident now with Cooper, especially today. He looked a lot better moving on the perimeter. I mean, there were times when he got a little there was like a switch late where someone got a 3. He and Jaden sort of had a mix up, and I think Cooper's supposed to get out there. But anyway, I mean, I think I feel more comfortable with him out there guarding someone like a Dante Scott. Like, I don't think he's
that's why
hopeless.
He played.
Yeah, well, yeah, right.
That's why he played, and Jackson and Book didn't.
Right, but I think we weren't sure what was going to happen early this season, and I think the last couple of times it was a little questionable. But now I felt like there's clearly going to be, this is a strategy with Kohler back now. Michigan State has more options, assuming foul trouble stays, as it is, just to go bigger, smaller, and makes the team more versatile. Right? It's kind of nice.
And I will say this on the Kohler thing, because this came up on the Spartan Mag board after the game. In response to that poster I mentioned who asked why he didn't play. Mm-hmm. I will admit, when Michigan State was going through a drought offensively, and that point that Maryland took the lead, 42-41, being honest, I did have the thought, boy, they were still going small. They're kind of filtering Reese maybe in and out a little bit, but they were still going small. I had the thought, I wonder if they could try to steal a couple possessions with Jackson just to get a couple buckets to get the offensive rhythm reestablished, because it was really rough. And it was right at that point that I was thinking that Malik Hall took the game over and made it move.
It didn't matter, yeah.
But it did occur to me that, boy, I know why I think I know why they're not playing him, but, might this be a time where you say, you know what, we'll live with the defensive issues in order to try and get ourselves reestablished offensively, but it didn't come to that because Malik Hall ended up doing that for them. But yeah, and then I guess the other guy we haven't really talked about at any length, and should, because he was the second leading scorer in the game. I'm sorry, jointly tied for high score, was Tyson Walker.
Who?
19 points, but here's the important part to me. 8 for 16 from the floor overall.
Yeah.
2 for 3 from 3, and 33 minutes. So we didn't get a chance to talk about it because it came up in a Tom Izzo press conference after we recorded the preview. But Tom Izzo told reporters that earlier this week that Tyson had been battling a groin injury.
Yeah.
And you could see it in that Michigan game when he would go over to the bench. You could see him, getting some treatment, doing something. He was having issues there. And he had been on like a 3-game run where his shooting was not up to his normal standards.
Right.
Well, I didn't see him, at least to my eyes, I didn't see any occasions today where it looked like it was bothering him. And the shooting numbers were right back where you want to see them. So I think that's very important for Michigan State. And he played 33 minutes on top of that.
Right.
Had a very tough defensive assignment because he spent time as one of the guys who was guarding Young. So he was asked to try and do a lot there as well. So this was a high-end, as we talk about, Maryland defends the hell out of you. They're very physical. So this was a high-impact game for him. And the fact that he was able to produce that well, play those kind of minutes, and not show, at least to my eyes, any obvious signs of anything lingering, that's a big deal.
All right, well, Michigan State's player that needed to keep in the gutter, brought to you by the brothers Jesse Gutters, was Jameer Young.
Yeah.
And if you've got problems with your gutters, or not sure if you're having some water issues, maybe in your basement, maybe your gutters are leaking, maybe there's some problems with your downspouts, check things out. It is time for the snow melt, because we still have some snow over here on the side of the state. But you want to make sure that's all taken care of. It's not a glamorous job, but there are people who actually find the work very glamorous. And those are the brothers Jesse Gutters. They can take care of you whether you're on the west side of the state, whether you're in the Metro Detroit, the east side of the state. They are there for you. They can repair the gutters. They can replace them. They can just clean them out. They can put the leaf guards on if you're tired of getting on a ladder and doing that very fun job of cleaning out your gutters. So they'll come out in any weather right now. They'll come out and do it. So check them out. It's a good time to get it taken care of before the spring rains come in a couple months. You can contact them by going to your support page at the Final Fours on the schedule.com/support. And there you can click on the link for either the Kurt on the east side, or sorry, on the west side, and Greg on the east side of the state. And they can get you that free estimate for you. All right, so the player that Michigan State needs to keep in the gutter, like I mentioned, Jameer Young, who had only 31 points on 9 of 22 shooting, 4 for 12 from 3, so about his average of 33%. Perfect from the line with 9 for 9, 4 rebounds, 2 assists, and 2 turnovers with a steal. So I think we can fairly say they did not keep him in the gutter since he had over half their points.
They didn't keep him in the gutter, that's for sure. I will say this. The 9 for 22 and the 4 for 12, you can live with. He didn't get crazy hot. He wasn't just torching them. Now, as opposed to that first game where they limited him to 4 free throws, he had 9 in this one.
Yeah.
So that tells you that, the field goal numbers aren't 100% of the story here, because he was able to get himself into traffic, draw some fouls, get himself to the line, and obviously impact the game from there. So, yeah, you certainly can't give Michigan State a plus here. But I would say this wasn't an ultra efficient game from him. He was really their only consistent source of offense, as you say. So it felt like that. But if you look at those shooting numbers, they're not terrible. in terms of what Michigan State gave up. The free throws mitigated some, I'll admit to that. But we've seen, I'll put it this way, I thought A.J. Storr played a better game for Wisconsin against Michigan State than Young did, even though Storr didn't have quite as many points. I think he had 28.
Yeah.
It was a much more efficient performance. Here's the other thing, too. Only 2 assists.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Half his average. And what that, Maryland as a team had 8 assists. So what that tells you is Michigan State's defense forced Maryland really into making a lot of one-on-one plays. Yep. That's what this game devolved into. Now they're not a share the ball team the way Michigan State is. So that number isn't perfect in terms of a corollary. But when you have 8 assists and 13 turnovers, that's indicative of a problem. That's indicative of either you played very badly on offense, or more likely the defense contributed a lot to that. And I think that was the case. The important part there is that he was a scorer, particularly in the second half, but Michigan State didn't let him create for anybody else. It was pretty much in the second half, it was a one-man show.
Yeah. And I felt like largely they did a very good job of keeping him out of lane. I recognize he had 7 free throws in the second half and 2 in the first, but he did not really completely punish them getting to the rim that often. I felt. I don't know if you feel that way too. I know he got a lot of points because he was the only one doing anything, because basically he just had the grenade every possession.
Yeah, I don't think. Look, I don't think 12 of his points came from three. So between threes and free throws, 21 of his 31.
Yeah.
So that means he only had 5 baskets that were other than that. And I'm with you. I didn't think he dominated the game going off the dribble. That's what I mean. Like you can't say Michigan State really locked him down, because clearly we're miles, light years away from that. But I really don't think they did a terrible job with him. There were individual plays. As I said, my biggest complaints in this game with the way they defended him had to do with occasional breakdowns in screening coverage.
Yeah.
Where they either went under and didn't recover fast enough to, so he had a good look, or the one where it was just blown coverage entirely and nobody was within, I think it was Carson recovered to give a corner contest against him, but it wasn't his responsibility anyway. It was Jaden. So, not as terrible. You see 31 points, like, wow, that guy put it to you. And he did kind of, but I feel like he had to try and do a lot to get those points.
Yeah, he had to really earn them. So then moving on to the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids, brings us the Michigan State player that cleans the glass the best. The Squeegee Squad, well, they clean your glass best. They can do it to your house, your high-rise, maybe your business. They even clean the Capitol. So if you need your windows cleaned, even in this weather, even in the spring, maybe it's a good time with all the stuff that's accumulated. They can go in the house. They'll take care of your inside your windows, the windowsills, the screens, which are super important to be able to see out. They can also go and power wash, which again, I cannot imagine power washing in 35-degree weather, but they'll go out and do it. So you can get a free estimate from the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids. And Grand Rapids is a very big Grand Rapids area, so I would just contact if you're kind of on the edge and see if they want to come out and take care of you. You get 15% off if you mentioned Rebound. When you get your estimate, you can find contact information at the support page at tfinots.com/support. So it was 4 to 3.5. You had a half rebound lead on me going to the game. You picked Mahdi. I had Jade Akins just because I wanted to do something different. And Akins had a good performance. He had 5. Sissoko only had 3. And Malik Hall finished with 7. So for a while there, it was 6. Hall had 6. And I thought, because Cooper had 6, Hall had 6. I thought, man, if Akins gets 6, I'm gonna win a third of a point. This is gonna be really complicated to try and do some serious fractions, but didn't end up that way. But overall, Michigan State, I thought, did a really good job. Well, that good. I'd say they did okay rebounding today. They out-rebounded Maryland, which they did. They were, I think, minus 15 last time, and this time they were plus 6.
Well, we'll talk about it more when we get into the keys, but I think despite the way it may have appeared to people watching it, when you drill down and you take a look at the totality, Michigan State was much better as a rebounding team in this game than they were in College Park.
Yeah.
And it's because, well, we'll go through it in a little more detail. I think the bottom line is this is one of the rare occasions where neither one of us has won.
Yes. Well, and I think, the key there too, I think, was, you had the splits first half and second half. In the first half, Maryland was doing pretty well on the offensive boards. And the second half, Michigan State pretty much closed the door on them. So that was, I think, one of the why it felt so bad, just because it didn't start out well. There were a lot of missed threes and, stuff, and they were getting these long rebounds. So finally go to the 5 keys to the game, brought to you by Nudge Printing. As you may remember, Nudge Printing are the ones who have our apparel store. So that closes on Monday at 8 p.m., so the February 5th. So if you want to get logoed apparel for Tiff Knots, all kinds of things are available, quarter zips, both ladies and men's, hoodies, T-shirts, full zip hoodies, and let's see, T-shirts and a tote bag. You can get all kinds of things. Head on over to nudgeprinting.com/TFFINOTS, or you can go to our support page and there click on the Nudge Printing apparel store for Tiff Knot stuff, and that'll take you to the store. You can get all that stuff. It's all just at cost. We're not taking anything. We just want to make sure you guys have an opportunity to get cool stuff. And again, it's the same high quality Nudge Printing stuff that you get with super comfortable, very wearable, very washable. I mean, I love the stuff. I'm going to actually order some more too myself. So I'd encourage you to do the same. And there's, if you're not a Michigan State fan in your life that wants some stuff, that maybe they've got another school that they support. They even added the Hoosiers. Although I'm guessing this is probably not a good time to start pushing and, moving Hoosiers gear, but, Nudge will be ready when the Hoosiers bounce back. So maybe you've got a Hoosier you live with, so maybe it's a good time to buy something for them too, or any other schools in the state of Michigan outside of the Wolverines. All right, so the 5 keys of the game. The first one, defensive rebounding. As I mentioned, Michigan State out-rebounded Maryland overall. Maryland had 8 offensive rebounds in the first half, 4 in the second half. They ended up with a 31-point-something% offensive rebounding rate, which is okay. In contrast, which is not part of this, but Michigan State with 40%.
Yeah, and that's why I say this was a vastly different story than the first game. And the reason it was vastly different is Michigan State came to play on its offensive rebound, in its offensive rebounding component. So again, you give up 12, and as you say, especially when a lot of them come in one flurry, it feels really bad. But when you look at this game as a whole, Michigan State hung in there. I mean, there's no question. They benefited from Julian Reese sitting.
For sure.
Because we saw in that first game, Julian Reese had 6 offensive rebounds. He's a monster on that end. And despite the fact that Jordan Geronimo, I thought, really gave them a boost, and you can argue he had 5 offensive rebounds himself.
Yeah.
Would Reese have had more than that?
Yeah.
Hard to say.
Yeah.
But regardless, it's all part of it, The foul trouble is part of it. And you still have to perform. And Michigan State, I thought, for as bad as 12 feels, the number to keep in mind is that 31%.
Yeah.
And the truth is that's well below Maryland's seasonal average. And it's kind of a rerun of the first game in that respect, because Maryland had 9 offensive rebounds in that game, and it felt worse than it was. I believe their rebounding percentage was very similar.
Yeah, they were all in the second half of that game. I think like 8 in the second half or something like that.
It was just for the game. It was just this side, just the plus side of 30%.
Yep.
So you can't say Michigan State completely shut them down, but Maryland did not dominate the game on the offensive glass. Michigan State, meanwhile, had, I think, one of their better offensive rebounding performances in a while.
Yeah, maybe since Baylor. I don't know.
Yeah, could be. because they really went out. We talked about Carson Cooper grabs 4 of them. Malik Hall had 2. Jaden Akins had 3.
Yeah.
So they got contributions from a few different guys, and that's a big deal. And if you look at what it all meant in terms of actual point production, Maryland on those 12 offensive rebounds only had 6 second chance points. Michigan State's 13 offensive or 12 offensive rebounds, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Michigan State's 12 offensive rebounds generated 11 second chance points.
Mm-hmm.
So MSU was actually +5 in terms of what those offensive rebounds meant from a point production perspective. So yeah, I don't think you could say definitively, hey, job well done, but job decently done, at least. And again, as you said, we didn't talk about MSU on the offensive end. Michigan State only had 2 offensive rebounds in the first game against these guys.
Yeah.
So I didn't necessarily expect this. But the fact is they did it, and it actually was a big contributor to the win.
Yeah, it's funny because in the game today, just I think because both teams were pretty ineffective scoring, it felt like the offensive rebounds, neither of them were that important. But I mean, to your point, it just kind of evened things out. But I don't know. I mean, it was impressive, and obviously the big one that got that run going for Michigan State, that was a game changer. So moving on to the second key of the game, defend without fouling. I think here again, Michigan State, you can consider this a win. Yeah, Jameer Young got there 9 free throws, and he was 9 for 9, and Maryland was 13 for 13. Even Reese hit both of his, but that was it. I mean, they only had 13 free throw attempts. Malik Hall had 11 on by himself, so Michigan State was 11 of 16. Again, more free throws attempt than Maryland, just like in the first game, which I think surprised us then, and it surprised me to happen a second time.
Yeah, it's a very important part of the defensive story for Michigan State. For the second game in a row, really an outstanding job keeping Maryland off the foul line. Now, this is another area where you could say, well, Julian Reese sitting as much as he did probably impacted things. Yeah, that's fair to say, although he wasn't in consistent foul trouble in that first game, and I believe he only had 3 attempts.
Yeah, not many.
In that one?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they had 2 in this one. So we don't know how it would have played out in that respect, but I know what happened over the 40 minutes. And this is a team that I believe averages 25 free throw attempts per game. I think that's their average. So last time they held them to below half of their average. This time, maybe just a tick over 50%. But still, really good job, even with Young getting 9 attempts. I mean, that is impressive stuff.
Yeah,
for Michigan State. To do that twice against a team that, by design, is looking to force you to foul them.
Yeah, and I think we talked about it before. Maryland is 16th in the country in free throw attempts per field goal attempt. So obviously, right. So the fact that Michigan State held to so low few attempts is really great. So the third key to the game was the turnovers. And this is one that, Michigan State dominated in College Park. They had an 18-8 edge. This time, I think it was pretty much even. It was 13 for Maryland
13-12.
And 12 for Michigan State.
Yeah.
So I'd say, I guess you could say it's a win that, in fact, you didn't lose that, but it wasn't an edge either way, which is important.
But, again, I turn to points generated from those possessions. Mm-hmm. Michigan State had a 15-11 edge in points off turnovers. Not huge, not nearly as big as in the first game, but 4 points. And then you put that together with what was the edge in second chance points? It was 11 to
5, I think.
It was 11 to 6.
Yeah.
So that's a 9-point differential for Michigan State in rebounding and turnovers in terms of the point production from there.
And that's the margin of victory.
And what was the spread? There you go.
Yeah.
There you go. That's my point.
Yep.
I think that obviously the 12 turnovers here were not ideal. I did not think Michigan State, we talked about it, their point guards kind of struggled a bit at times because of the way Maryland was defending. And so that certainly cost MSU some possessions. The good news was those weren't live ball turnovers.
Right.
Defensively, Michigan State wasn't great. It didn't seem to me watching in terms of forcing live ball turnovers, but you add it up.
Yeah.
7 of their 13 were steals.
Yeah.
So, and some of those did lead to points, so that was an edge. And Michigan State and Maryland are very similar teams. They're almost identical in terms of their steal percentage. MSU had a 7-5 edge. So it's not that they had a knockout punch, but you start adding up these small margins in a couple different important areas, and you get to nearly a double-digit win when you put it all together and you get the complete picture, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think part of that was impressive was AJ was, although he had some of those turnovers that were head scratchers, he did have a number of steals that were really great plays. Like I think that one he had late where he ended up laying it up, but he had one early where he deflected it. And Jade got it, and then he got then it went back to AJ, who then lobbed to Carr on the break. So they definitely made some hay with those steals, like you said. So it was, in a game like this, every little bit of edge, if you just add a few of those up, it becomes enough to win a game, and that's what you need to do.
That late one you mentioned was really big because I believe that pushed it to 10.
Yeah, that kind of finished the game right there.
And that was just sort of the Mas at that point. That was the end. And it was a great individual play by him. So they didn't force as much from Maryland in the way of mistakes maybe as in the first game. I mean, Jameer Young had 7 turnovers, if I remember correctly, in the first game. He only had 2 in this one, so MSU wasn't able to get to him in quite the same way, but still, I think they did the job.
Fourth key to the game was tempo. Michigan State had a big edge in the first meeting of 14-3 in fast break. This time it was 4-4, which pretty much I think it described it. I mean, Michigan State was not able to get much tempo. They had at least one, maybe 2 30-second violations, and so shot clock. But I would say my impression was that it was fluky that first half in College Park more than anything. I mean, this is kind of what the game we expected in College Park, and so that I think, I don't know. I mean, they weren't able to get the tempo they wanted, I guess, is the answer. So they didn't succeed there. Yeah.
It's hard to play against a defense like this. It just is. And I know people don't want to hear that. They want to believe that everything is under Michigan State's control. But you look at one telling number is the assists to made field goals.
Right.
And I'm doing some quick math here.
14 out of 24 for
14 divided by 24. 58% of its made field goals were assisted. Now, that's not a terrible number, but Michigan State, I believe, averages it's either 63 or 64%.
Yeah, probably.
So what it tells you is Maryland made them a little more limited, in terms of the way in which they were able to run offense,
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's to their credit. I think Michigan State, it was very, very hard for them to play at the tempo that they want to play at. Because when you got a team that's got, when you look back at it, and I think back to the majority of that game, it is remarkable and a hell of a statement for Malik Hall that he was able to get the kind of production that he did, given the way Dante Scott was guarding him in the post. Because Dante Scott, for the most part, was incredible in his post denial.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? I think they were tough. They were tough on AJ. They were tough on Tyson, and it's not an excuse, but it also needs to be acknowledged that part of the reason Michigan State wasn't able to play as fast as it would like to, and again, I'm not just talking about transition, I'm talking about the way they run their sets, is they would get into things and Maryland had taken it away.
Yeah.
And so you got to go back and you got to reset. And, that can take a toll on guys mentally. And then you got to go back in and try to figure it out and get a shot generated with a lot less time available to you. So I give Maryland credit for that. Most of the time when Michigan State doesn't play fast, I tend to think it's Michigan State's fault mostly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Some of it was Michigan State's fault today, but I think it's fair to give Maryland's defense some credit for that because they just take away so damn much.
Oh, even way out on the perimeter. Like they're out 5 feet beyond the 3-point line. They're
everything.
Challenging handoffs. It's terrible.
Yep. Absolutely. Just to execute a simple handoff, every time Michigan State put the ball in one of their fives' hands, I held my breath. Because of the normally you don't as much because you don't see teams defending quite that aggressively. But Maryland does. That you're exactly right. They made every pass was tough. And so when that happens, it's going to have an effect of slowing you down a bit.
Yeah.
I think that's fair to say.
Well, and I think especially the fact that Reese wasn't out there. I mean, he plays out, but not as in your face like Geronimo. So Geronimo really gets in you, and so he makes all that even harder. You got a good
point there. That's a really good point too, and I'm glad you mentioned that. Again, I'm not trying to argue that Maryland was better off without Reese. In aggregate, they're clearly not. But one way that it makes them maybe even tougher. Now, a Maryland fan could say, yeah, but if Reese is out there, we don't give up 12 offensive boards. Maybe so. But in terms of the possession-to-possession 5-on-5 defense, I think you're exactly right. I think with Geronimo, they were just able to switch. They were able to extend pressure much better than they would be because that's, Reese he's an aggressive defender, but he's not that aggressive. They don't have him typically out 20 feet from the basket trying to do things, whereas with Geronimo, you can. So I think that's a good point.
And so the fifth and final key to the game was offensive balance. This is one that, inside out, I think, Michigan State was able to do that. They could got stuff generated, but I mean, everything was hard. So, which is partly because the Terps just do a good job of preventing that from any sort of flow.
They do, and they were, Michigan State for the game. Let's see, they were 50% on twos, 20 for 40, which against this team is not bad production. Points in the paint, so that's a subset of your two production because obviously you could have twos that are 15-foot jumpers.
Sure.
But Michigan State outscored them 30-18 in the paint, which isn't terribly surprising given that Reese sat as much as he did.
Mm-hmm.
But still good to see. And I think when you look at Michigan State scoring essentially half their points was 30 out of 63 in the paint, that's pretty good. Now, what I don't think it did is it didn't create the opportunities from three that I'd hoped for. Because when we talk about this, it's really two components. The first component is obviously, well, if you're getting a lot of point production in the paint, that means you're scoring in areas that should be efficient shots, right? And that's a good thing. But it also should force, if you get enough of it, should force the defense to be a little looser on the perimeter, which means you should be getting better quality shots. I'm not going to say that Michigan State didn't get some good looks that they missed, because they did. But the fact is they only got 14 threes up. And I don't remember them passing on a lot of good looks that they just didn't take.
Yeah, maybe Malik.
I don't remember that happening.
A couple times, but that's it.
Yeah, but that's, again, I don't even necessarily count those, because his evaluation of an appropriate shot window is different.
Yeah.
Than a lot of other guys. And the defense knows that too, by the way. So I think, we talked about Maryland is actually, it's a funny thing because by percentage, teams have actually had a good deal of success against them from three. MSU did in the first game. MSU was plus 40%.
Mm-hmm.
They just didn't take very many. They only got up 16. I think they were 7 for 16. In this game, they only got up 14. So it was even better. That's where Maryland excels, and you could see it in this game. They just don't give you much.
Yeah.
And so even though Michigan State was able to be productive from 2 at a decent clip, it didn't have that add-on effect of also making things a little easier on the perimeter, because that just did not happen.
Yeah, I felt like, Aikens 1 for 7, but 6 of those were really good looks, and he just missed them. And Holland missed at least one that was that ones you expect him to make at least half the time. And they weren't, when they were open, they still weren't even hitting them. And it felt a little bit like a Syracuse game in some respects, in that where even when you finally get it open, you just rush it
to some extent. But I'm gonna tell you, I'm not inclined to go back over it yet. But watching it live, my sense was that, there are open shots and then there are open shots.
Yeah.
And so what I mean by that is, most of your shots are not going to come with a guy draped all over the shooter. Those are very rare. So then it comes down to, well, what actually is that? When I use the phrase shot window, I'm sure most of our listeners know what I mean, but just in case, what I'm talking about is the amount of time that you've got to get the shot off before there's a legitimate contest from the defender. So is that a second? Is that half a second? Is it a second and a half? Whatever it is. And I think Maryland actually did a pretty good job at limiting those shot windows.
Mm-hmm.
Enough that I'm willing to give them at least a little bit of credit for Michigan State's subpar shooting performance in this game. Not all of it. Some of them were probably shots that Michigan State should have hit, and Aikens in particular had a couple like that. But I do think some of the other misses were actually, they were decent contests. The shot window was not where you would normally like to see it and where Michigan State normally does see it. Because I think that team they are locked in enough that they are reacting to it, and they're able to recover to shooters and maybe rush you just that extra half beat.
Yeah.
That's enough. It's enough to, shooting is one of the real epitomes, in my opinion, in athletics of a rhythmic activity. And so anything you can do to take somebody off rhythm, even just a little bit, can have an impact. And I do credit Maryland with some of that. I do think that's fair. Not the entirety of it, but some of it.
Well, the win, which is a gritty win, which is actually, I think, one of the most impressive things, that this is a team that did not seem to really be bothered by when even Maryland came back, and hardly coming back. It's
You're
like
exactly
slow,
right.
It's like it was to Maryland, just like Maryland, a turtle's pace where they finally caught up and passed them just briefly. No sense of panic. I mean, the team seemed to just take it in stride, and there was not. It was, I don't know. I just was impressed with how they responded, which you'd expect from a senior team that's had success. But still, they were able to do it. And again, it's at home, so it's different than if you're on the road. But a tough win, a tough team to play, a team I'm glad we don't have to face again, hopefully. And so, 2 wins in a row now, heading to on the road where, I mean, every game on the road, barring maybe Ann Arbor, is a tough place to play. And so even in Minneapolis is not going to be easy, as Northwestern found out today too. So, but it's an important win to start separating from the rest of the pack here, and hopefully now tied for 4th, Michigan State can keep climbing up and get that double bye in the Big Ten tournament.
Can you believe that's 6 straight for Michigan State against Maryland?
No, I was thinking that too.
That's the last 3 years now. The last 3 years, MSU has won 6 straight. And, this was, from the point Maryland joined the conference, this was a tough rivalry.
Yeah.
I mean, Maryland tagged good Michigan State teams with losses. I remember Cassius's senior year. They came into East Lansing and beat Michigan State. And then, of course, Michigan State was able to return the favor. But maybe like a week or so later. But, some of those teams that Melo Trimble played on were very difficult for Michigan State to beat. They were not an easy match for a while, but to have won 6 straight against them I think that would surprise a lot of Michigan State fans. And every one of them before today was, I believe, a 5-point or less margin. So this is the first time in that streak that it got outside of that. And again, anybody who watched the game knows this really wasn't a 9-point game.
No, it wasn't.
This was another one very much like those earlier games where it was possession to possession for about 95% of the game. And it's one of the more remarkable things to me is that Michigan State only trailed. They were never tied on the 0-0, and they only trailed for, I believe it was less than a minute.
13 seconds.
Of game time. 13 seconds. They trailed for 13 seconds. So Michigan State led for 39 minutes and 47 seconds, right? And yet, I'd say, 37 of those minutes, 36, it was a 5-point or less margin.
Yeah, it was. Yeah,
it just kind of hung in that 3 to 5 range for forever.
Yeah,
and part of that was because both teams had trouble sustaining consistent offense. So nobody ever really went on a run where they're like, hey, I've scored, 7 possessions in a row. That was not happening. It was much more disjointed than that. Some of the credit to the two defenses, some of it to the offenses not playing as well as they'd like. But pretty remarkable. And I would say this about what winning games like this says. Yeah, you can say you were at home, team you're supposed to beat, you're favored by whatever it was, 5.5, 6.5. You're supposed to win that game, blah, blah, blah. The fact is, we saw Michigan State in November and December lose very competitive games.
Yes.
The loss to James Madison, which was at home, a very competitive game that they didn't make plays in down the stretch to win. Neutral court losses against Duke and Arizona. Both games, they were right there, had a shot late. After bad starts, recovered in the second half, had legitimate chances to win those games, and didn't make the plays when it counted most.
Mm-hmm.
I would argue the game at Nebraska was like that. Really, of those first 5 losses, the only one that wasn't was the game at home against Wisconsin.
Yeah.
And then in Big Ten play, the loss at Illinois, very much this kind of game. Michigan State, if you look at it, has not played very many tight games. Now, people can argue and say, well, the Minnesota game ended up 10, but it really wasn't that kind of margin. Okay, fair. And that's the same thing today. Yeah. But I still think it's a sign. You can't take it for granted. And it's a sign of progress and a sign of growth that, particularly against this kind of team, that this is the furthest thing from a free, loosey-goosey kind of game.
Yeah.
This was, every possession was a war. It was slow. It was in the mud. And you just had to fight through it and find your way to the finish line. And Michigan State did that. Don't just shrug that off and say, well, yeah, that's what they're supposed to do. No, I don't accept that. That's a sign of progress from a team. You can talk all you want about the experience and everything else, but they haven't done it that much this year. Because the situations, most of the situations they've been in where that was, late game plays were of a heightened importance, they failed. So to do it positively, and the game at Maryland is another example, one of the few other examples too, I guess.
Yeah.
We should mention that. But recently, you're seeing Michigan State start to figure that out a little bit, it appears. So that is another positive step in this team's growth, and you shouldn't discount that.
All right. Well, I think we'll leave it there. I want to remind you again to head on over to our support page. There you can get access to all our sponsors to the show: Nudge Printing, the Brothers of Just Two Gutters, the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids, also our affiliate deals with Element Rehydrating Drink and the Podbean. Also, you can get to that store that has apparel. You can head on over to nudgeprinting.com/TFFINOTS to get to that store as well, where you get a logoed apparel. And finally, you can get an autographed copy of Coach Garland's book, Agoji, and you can get that linked in our page, the support page as well. Also, ways if you want to support the show financially, you can do that either on a one-time gift via PayPal or Venmo, or on a recurring basis on Substack or Patreon. So until next time, the Final Four is on the schedule. Go Green.